is an entirely legitimate exercise, both in content and form, including convergence on varying issues to differing degrees. The operating principle of a multipolar world is the legitimate pursuit of flexibility without seeking exclusivity. After all, the latter is antithetical to the very logic of multipolarity. The grammar of multipolarity too is obviously very different from that of bipolarity. Attempts to mix the two are not just confusing, they at times can even be deliberately misleading. We must also recognize that translating a multipolar algorithm on the ground is not easy, it's much harder than it sounds. A key concern, even while widening options, is to ensure consistent sensitivity to the interests of a critical strategic partner. Indeed, it is this deep sense of consideration for each other that has been the formula of our ties. Mutual interest mandates that this continues to be so between India and Russia. Now, an important reason why India and Russia readily accept multipolarity is their strong sense of independence. Perhaps such self-confidence is a natural outlook for large polities with a long history, a rich culture, and a deep-rooted identity. Our past may be different, but what they do have in common is a clear sense of national interest and a strong sense of national resolve. We have dealt with each other long enough to know that these qualities are very much part of our basic character. A world of convergences that the multipolar and rebalanced international order has created will inevitably be different from the one that we were used to before. Quite obviously, it will be less structured and more fluid, leaving open the possibility of differences even among those who are together. The inclination would be to look at pragmatic and result-oriented cooperation on defined issues. To some extent, the weakening of multilateralism has contributed to this. Between the collective interests of the entire international community and the compulsions of decision-making, a number of intermediate layers exist in a variety of areas. We are seeing this both as ad hoc and more formal arrangements on security, on economic, and on technology issues. In specialized domains as well, and even in global bodies. Given their prominence, India and Russia are in fact members of many such arrangements, whether you talk about the G20, BRICS, East Asia Summit, or the SCO, MTCR, FATF, Wassenaar, etc. Now, we are not unique in that respect because many others are equally embedded in such understandings. Sub-universal groups have always been a reality. They supplement and not replace more universal arrangements. Given the flux in world politics, a large element of our working together is today likely to happen in such formats. Changes in the capabilities and interests of major players naturally lead us to reassess the global arena, whether it is Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Eurasia, the Arctic, or the Indo-Pacific. New developments have redefined our understanding of the landscape as also of its risks and opportunities. None of us can afford to be in denial of these shifting realities. After all, international relations can never be change-proofed. If there are enhanced capabilities in some cases, or Pacific, whose disconnection was an outcome of a certain moment of history, for a nation like India that now sees much of its trade eastwards, we must look beyond such anachronisms. Both our interests and our reach today extend well into the Pacific. Our major partners are located there, and indeed the cooperation with the Russian Far East is one notable example. The reality is that there is a vast global commons whose safety, security, ecology, environment, and activities are increasingly a shared responsibility. For those who wish to better understand our thinking, I would refer them to the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative that Prime Minister Modi announced at the East Asia Summit in 2019. The ability of India and Russia to work together is facilitated by our shared belief in the centrality of the ASEAN. The shift of global growth eastwards has been a continuous phenomenon over the last 4 decades. Its consequences for the international order are now getting visible. This shift took place largely in the context of globalization, though it was not unaffected by big power calculations. As it unfolds, concerns both during the COVID pandemic and before have provided some insights into the risks of globalization. On the political front, it is essential for India and Russia to work together to ensure the stability and diversity of the world as we know it. This includes insistence on honoring agreements and observing laws. On the economic side, there is a growing realization of the importance of resilient and reliable supply chains. Collaboration can surely add to the options before the world, as we have already seen in the case of vaccines. If we are to continue influencing the direction of global developments positively, it is imperative that we always pay adequate attention to the constant strengthening of our bilateral cooperation. In 2 decades of strategic partnership and 5 before that of close friendship, defense, energy, nuclear, space, and science and technology have constituted the key propelling forces. Russia has always been a dependable defense partner of India. The enormous experience of past cooperation is today being applied to a more contemporary requirement, including the Make in India program. This transition can accommodate the interests of both sides and even lead to new areas of military technical collaboration. The BrahMos example could well be a precursor of what is to come. This needs to be accompanied by a greater focus on military to military ties, including in the maritime domain. The establishment of the 2+2 mechanism, which was recently agreed to between the Prime Minister and President Putin, promises to provide a new vitality. Space and nuclear are among the success stories of our relationship. The Kudankulam project was the first beneficiary of India's resumed civil nuclear collaboration with international partners. The trilateral nuclear cooperation that we both have with Bangladesh also holds very interesting possibilities. Insofar as space is concerned, the training of Indian astronauts for the Gaganyaan mission brings back memories of Rakesh Sharma's flight into space. Overall, science and technology have been a productive area that could be taken forward with the participation of the private sector. This bodes well for both commercialization and for startups. If I were to give you an example of the collaborations underway, I would particularly point to the Sputnik vaccine, and we should recognize that this has benefits not just for public health in India, but actually larger gains for the international community. Where investment and trade are concerned, the last few years have seen a visible pickup, especially in the energy sector. As a result, we are seeing more Indian participation in production and import of oil and gas, as well as greater Russian presence in refining and distribution. Expanding trade in goods is very much the focus. In pharmaceuticals, medical devices, fertilizers, chemicals, petrochemicals, agro industries, and timber. These are all areas of interest. Collaboration in railways and waterways, inland waterways, can actually make a difference to the pace of India's national development. Where trade itself is concerned, more efficient connectivity and reduction of non-trade barriers are areas that need to be addressed. Now, as you all know, there is an immense legacy of intellectual goodwill in our relationship. Many of us recall an era where our scholars and institutions interacted frequently and productively. And in fact, IMEMO was itself one of the centers of this bonding, and I particularly appreciate Dr. Dinkin's commitment to maintain this tradition. Today, there is a need to reconnect our youth and renew appreciation of our languages, literature, and sciences. The importance of tourism for our relationship can never be underestimated. Some initiatives have already started to take place, while others are still in the pipeline. The Sirius Atal Innovation Mission, started by Prime Minister Modi in 2018, represents a new model of interaction. We welcome the ICCR Oriental Institute fellowships that were established recently. The Ganga-Volga dialogue, participation in the Raisina dialogue, popularity of yoga, the revived interaction on Buddhism, and digitization of manuscripts are all examples that speak of a renewed enthusiasm. So, as we contemplate the future, how we navigate some of the important transitions will help define our further ambitions. India and Russia will definitely see more common opportunities in the regions immediately beyond. New partnerships could also be explored, including in the trilateral formats. Connectivity will be increasingly central to our interests, whether we speak of the North-South corridor, the Chennai-Vladivostok Maritime Corridor, or the Northern Sea Route. India is actively engaging with the Eurasian Economic Union for a trade agreement and participating in the endeavors of the SCO and BRICS. When it comes to disarmament or technology issues, we seek practical and productive outcomes in multilateral fora. Reformed multilateralism is also in our common interest, and we value Russia's support for India's permanent membership of the UN Security Council. Regional issues like Afghanistan and Middle East have seen convergence previously that may be mutually beneficial to continue. As an observer state, India is also interested in deepening its engagement with Russia, the chair of the Arctic Council, on Arctic issues. Energy, in particular, holds enormous promise as the two nations engage in long-term planning and cooperation. The big issues of our time are combating terrorism, addressing pandemics, and acting on climate change. On all of these, India and Russia are unquestionably on the same page. We have both been victims of fundamentalist thinking and know well the dangers of radicalization and extremism. As pluralistic societies, we must be especially on guard against the revival of such forces. Where global health is concerned, a history of scientific collaboration can today be repurposed to meet this new priority. On climate change, Russia can really be an indispensable partner as India transitions towards greater LNG consumption and renewables. The direction and progress of major relationships is very much dependent on our leadership. In our case, Prime Minister Modi and President Putin have met 19 times since 2014. That itself speaks a lot for their commitment. We, of course, look forward to hosting the President in India for the annual bilateral summit. It is also natural in societies for people to have an image of their partners. Russia has a unique standing with the Indian public, and maintaining that sentiment is very much an asset for our relationship. In the world of current diplomacy, ours is a particularly mature relationship. More than its contemporaries, it has withstood the test of time, finding new convergences with changing circumstances. Geopolitical compatibility, leadership trust, and popular sentiment remain its key drivers. History is very much in our favor, something that cannot always be said for all relationships. Drawing from the past, assessing the present and committing to the future, I have every confidence that our two nations would continue to realize the full benefits of our special and privileged strategic relationship. Thank you for your attention. This was almost Indian by now. Absolutely.
Esteemed Dr. Jaishankar, I appreciate very much your presentation. It's very thoughtful. It's an excellent analysis of the most important issues of the current international agenda, and I guess it would be helpful to the scholars of our institute. I guess we have some time for several questions, if you don't mind. So let me start. What is the Indian view on the rise of China and its international impact? Do you see this view is diverging from the Russian viewpoint, and how significant is those diversion?
Well, I can answer the first. I think you might be able to answer the second better. But the first one, in terms of how we see the rise of China, if you look at it not as a political science analysis, but as in the flow of history. After the Second World War, as the grip of, I would say, Western imperialist powers in the world weakened, large parts of the world became independent. They assumed control over their own destiny. They took time to actually rebuild their societies and, I would say, get over the damage which years of colonialism or foreign occupation had caused them. So, if you're not talking just about China, but I will come back to China here, what you have seen pretty much continuously since the last 75 years is a rebalancing in the world where new production centers have come up, new consumption centers have come up, therefore new prosperity has come up, therefore new power has come up. And I would say China represents perhaps the largest, the most dramatic of these cases. But there are other cases. If you look at ASEAN, which in many ways on the economic side, certainly socially led the way to some degree, or what you call the East Asian tiger economies before that. So in a way, China is part of a trend. In a way, China is an exception because of its scale, because of its history, because of its power today. How do we perceive it? We perceive it for us, it's a natural happening to some degree because we see ourselves in a similar situation. Maybe our timing may be some years behind, maybe the pace and intensity of it may be a little different. But you could say broadly in this same time span, actually India's position vis-a-vis the rest of the world has also changed. Now, why is that particularly impactful for us? One, because of course we are an immediate land neighbor of China. Two, we have a lot of outstanding issues, primarily the border, but not just the border issue. And of course, three, because it changes the dynamics of Asia very much. I would say it changes the dynamics of Eurasia. So there it matters as much to Russia as it does to us. How do we see it together, comparatively, India and Russia? I think to some degree you can find the answers in forums like BRICS, where we both see virtues, profit, advantage in collaborating between ourselves, between China, as well as, we have something called RIC, but we also have a larger grouping which involves Brazil and South Africa today. How do we assess it strategically? There I can only speak for myself. I would say for the last 40 years, we've had a very stable relationship with China. It is, I'm not saying that there were no issues and challenges in the relationship, but it has been very stable, and it saw a big economic element. China essentially emerged as our second largest trade partner. But for the last 1 year, there has been a lot of concern about the relationship because, China has not observed agreements that it had signed up to when it came to our border. After 45 years, we actually had a border incident with casualties. And peace and tranquility on the border for any country is the foundation of a relationship with a neighbor. So naturally, if the foundationship has got disturbed, so has the relationship.
Okay, thank you very much. If you let me, I'll say a couple words about the difference of perception. And I derive this difference mainly from your answer. We have a huge land border with China. It's more than 4,000 kilometers. We do not have a border with India. So the difference of perceptions from both capitals, from New Delhi and Moscow, derives from this difference and this geographical specificity. So please, colleagues, who would like, Alexei Arbatov, academician Arbatov, please.
Your Excellency, thank you for your sophisticated presentation. My question is there a nuclear arms race between India and China? Is there a prospect for nuclear arms control between India and China?
No, I don't believe that there's a nuclear arms race between India and China. If you look at the points of time when India and China became nuclear weapon powers, China became in 1964, India became in 1998. The Chinese decision, and I say this as someone, this was my academic specialty when I was doing my PhD. The Chinese decision to exercise, to make nuclear weapons was primarily focused on the United States and the then Soviet Union. I would say both the history, the scale, and the nature of the Chinese program, therefore, is much more linked to the US and Russia. In our case, we exercised our nuclear option, saying upfront that we would be aiming only for a minimum deterrent. Actually, there were very few countries who actually said that. I mean, the only other country which hinted at that when they made nuclear weapons was France. But even France was not so explicit as we were. So for a country which, where there's a 30-year gap and the later country says, I'm aiming only for a minimum deterrent, I don't think you have the basis then for an arms race. I think the evolution of the Chinese program has a much larger dynamic than ours.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Trupnikov, please.
Your Excellency, first of all, thanks a lot for a wonderful presentation. I would like to ask a question, which today is rather actual. 2 decades back, or around this time, both India and Russia were closely collaborating, fighting the menace of terrorism from the soil of Afghanistan. We both supported the so-called Northern Alliance, both morally and even materially. Now, after the United States and allied forces leave Afghanistan, the prospects of instability. It is recognized publicly. The prospects of instability will rise. What, in your opinion, might be spheres of close cooperation between India and Russia today in putting, so to say, an obstacle to spreading of instability from the soil of Afghanistan in the region as a whole, specifically to the nearby countries? I mean, Central Asia, from our point of view, which is near to Russia. Of course, China. Of course, India. Kashmir. First of all, and
said good words about our relationship over many years. Our relationship developed because there were people like you who worked for me, so hard on it. So I feel it's only appropriate to recognize that. When I was actually in Moscow on my first posting in 1979. So when I look at this at this issue, I look with some sense of history, not just of 20 years, perhaps even of 40 years. What has changed for us? If one looks at the issue of terrorism, because that was the first concept you brought up, both India and Russia, we are against, fundamentalist thinking, radicalization. We are against violent extremism. We are against terrorism. We are pluralistic societies. We have been targeted, both of us. And I don't think for either of us that has changed. I don't think we have changed our position on terrorism, on fundamentalism, on violence, and on defending pluralistic societies. What has been our position on Afghanistan? We have both supported, we were very clear 20 years ago certainly, that we were for a united Afghanistan, we were for a sovereign Afghanistan, we were for an Afghanistan where minorities had a fair share of representation. We were for an Afghanistan which was at peace with itself and at peace with its neighbors. I don't think that has changed. So if the first principle, the terrorism principle, hasn't changed, and if our Afghanistan approach hasn't changed, then let us look at what could have changed. I would say, it's important when we look today, and since you again referred to the erstwhile Northern Alliance, it was not just us, it was also Iran was involved in it. And yesterday on my way to Moscow, I actually stopped in Tehran, and I had a chance to call on the president-elect, Ayatollah Raisi, and to meet my counterpart Javed Zarif, and clearly we discussed Afghanistan in some detail. So I do think that the countries of the region, both the, I would say, near region and the little bit beyond region, have a very strong interest in ensuring, that we get an outcome in Afghanistan which is both good for Afghanistan and which is good for the region. And they are not different. Because I can tell you what is good for Afghanistan will automatically be good for the region. Now, whether we have the wisdom to do it, whether we, have the clarity of thinking to do it, I think that is very much up to our generation. So, at least from my end, I can say we are quite clear what the challenges are. But in diplomacy and in international relations, you never take anything for granted. So you have to keep working at it, keep building partnerships, keep making people understand what are the challenges and what could be the consequences of that.
Thank you. Alexei Kupriyanov, please.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your brilliant presentation. I'd like to ask you, you mentioned the Indo-Pacific. What does India want from Russia in Indo-Pacific? Which role could Russia play in the region from your point of view? I mean, in the Indian Ocean region, in the Pacific Ocean region, and in the Indo-Pacific as a whole. Thank you.
Look, Russia is I use the word Euro-Pacific because I think it captures it better than just saying Russia is a Pacific power. But it is a Pacific power. At the end of the day, what is Indo-Pacific about? Indo-Pacific means that it is no longer practical to draw some line somewhere and say, well, this side of the line is different and that side of the line is different. Okay, and that's essentially the case I made in my talk. Because when I look at India, 25 years ago, we started something called Look East. It matured into Act East. Today, Indo-Pacific is a further advancement of Act East. What has changed in this period? Today, our top trade partners include China, Japan, Korea, Russia, of course, Australia, ASEAN. Our trade with ASEAN is almost $100 billion. So, if I were to take my big hubs of trade, the trade I have with ASEAN would roughly be the size of the trade I have with Europe. The trade I have with China would be about the same. If I put China, Japan, Korea, it would be more. And it is not, in one way, it is something new. In one way, it is something old. I mean, if you if you travel up from India, through Southeast Asia, you look at the coast of Vietnam, you even look at the coast of China. I mean, Indian traders, Arab traders came there for hundreds of years. I mean, there are still, archaeological sites even in Fujian province, near Da Nang, Hue in Vietnam, which are Indian, not Indian now, but Indian 1500 years ago. So the point I make on Indo-Pacific is for reasons of a certain period of history, powers, primarily European powers, okay, and European powers not including Russia, okay, they drew lines, they made changes, they created walls, they broke up connectivity, they re-architectured the world as they wanted it. I think today this part of the world says, well, thank you very much, now you're over. Now my natural process will start to flow and things will happen. And I think Indo-Pacific is very much an outcome of that. Now your question, where can Russia come in? I think in many ways Russia is there. If Russia acts like Russia, Russia will make its full contribution. I mean, when I speak today of a Chennai-Vladivostok maritime route, when we speak of Indian economic investments in the Far East, when Russia takes part in the East Asia Summit, all of that, to my mind, is very much part of Indo-Pacific. So, I think beyond a point, we should not get caught up in these very, I would say, semantic debates, terminological debates. Terminology is important. I'm not disputing that. We need to move with the times of the day. This is a globalized world. We can't divide the world into little bits and pieces and say, well, some countries will do some things and other countries won't do other things. I think that's not the way the world works anymore.
Thank you so much. Please, представьтесь, пожалуйста.
Please introduce yourself.
Honorable and most esteemed Minister, I am Dr. Anwar Azimov. For a long time I was a distinguished ambassador, now I am extinguished this year, but still I am very committed friend of India. served 15 years in New Delhi, including I was DCM in our embassy. I am a great patriot of our bilateral relations, and I really appreciate your presentation, which was well thought, overwhelming, profound, and inspiring. I especially liked your remark that our relations and our friendship, shouldn't be taken for granted. We have to work hard in different directions. There are certain powers who tries to divide us. I don't think that they will be successful, since our relations are based on a number of very firm principles: mutual sympathy, mutual trust, confidence, and equality. Equality, we really work like equal partners. But we have in our bilateral relations a number of institutions, a number of mechanisms of bilateral cooperation in military, trade, economic, academic. But I think, Honorable Minister, one element is missing. That's why my suggestion, and I want to hear your reaction on the reliability or the possibility of realization of this idea. I think that, of course, we have dialogue, summits, ministers, etc. I am interested in the forum of think tankers of both countries, of the former politicians and, first of all, former diplomats, shrewd, skilled diplomats. In India, there are a number of excellent Indian ambassadors to Russia. In these connections, I think it is a credit for India, it's credit for you, for the ministry, that you have such a distinguished and very capable ambassador who really has high reputation, including in my ministry, in other ministries. So, idea is to think about setting up an Indian-Russian, Russian-Indian Center for Strategic Analysis and Research, based in New Delhi, perhaps in Moscow in this institute. This center will be the focus of the attention of very prominent diplomats, politicians, academicians, with one idea: to think about the prospects of our relations, how we have to enrich these relations, to give new impetus, new content. In my opinion, if we realize this idea, our relations will be in the firm hands. Thank you.
Oh, I completely share your sentiment. I will give serious thought to it, and please don't take that as a polite response, because I do find that today we need to create new platforms for engagement. Some years ago, for example, we worked with one of our think tanks and created the Raisina Dialogue, and I'm very happy to see every year the Russian participation in Raisina has been very strong, very good. So the idea that if we can have some kind of bilateral mechanism, some kind of bilateral think tank, some involving retired diplomats, I think it's an idea worth considering. I will certainly go back and reflect on it.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You know, we have rather good relations with Raisina Dialogue, and we invited Samir Siran frequently to our institute, to our Primakos reading. I may tell you that during recent couple of decades, we are heavily invested in Asian studies, in China studies, in Japanese studies, Korean studies, ASEAN studies, and of course of India. Maybe you know, IMMO is #1 among Russian think tanks according to Pennsylvania ratings. So we are working hard as much as we can. So I very much appreciate your time with us, and I guess that your thoughts would serve like a meat for rather able scholars who are gathering in this audience. I guess that one of the most important, let's say, messages which we got out of the current developments is health does matter. So I wish you health, good health, prosperity to your country, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure. just step down for a minute and I see one or two people.